Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Identity Insights by Indicio. TOIP recently held their first meeting of the year dedicated to moving forward on trust registries, and today I'm joined by Enterprise Team Lead Mike Ebert to give us a bit of an overview on what was discussed. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today, Mike. Could you please start us off with a quick explanation of what the goal of this trust registry group is?
So the Trust over IP Trust Registry Task Force held their first meeting of the year, and that was actually one of the things that they went over is to say let's be clear about what we're trying to do here. What are our goals? And so the basic idea is that the agents and people that are going to be using decentralized identity solutions have to make trust decisions, and some of the trust decisions are covered by the cryptography and the technology. Some of them are human trust decisions. So, you can stand up any old issuer or verifier you want all over the internet. And the question is, of those, which do I as a person trust? They all operate the same way, but we need to determine which one is from a party that we know is going to behave. And so the task force for trust registries has stated that their goal is to provide tools and some standards for communicating the data about those trusted parties. And so their primary way to help with those tools and procedures and standards is to create a specification for how to create a trust registry.
Okay. So for those unfamiliar, could you please give us a brief description of what a trust registry is and what it does?
Okay, perfect. So answering this question requires a little background. So there are a couple different solutions to, answering this problem of who do we trust? Which agents do we believe in? And so there's, different solutions being worked on in the community. They all have different names and a couple different nuances. So Trust Registry is the name that Trust over IP is using for this. That's their name for the solution of, how do we communicate who to trust? And the Decentralized Identity Foundation also has a solution. Theirs is called Trust Establishment, and they have a trust list. And so there is some effort, being put into the community for unifying these efforts. And at some point in the future, everything might get renamed as, everybody decides on what the joint effort might be called. That being said, Trust over IP has released a version 1 spec for trust registries, and the spec describes a data model and an API for requesting that data, and a protocol that describes a couple other standards that go with that, and what some useful requirements are. So basically, a trust registry is the name of a trust solution as described by the Trust over IP Foundation.
All right, interesting. Could you go into a little bit about what are some of those useful requirements that they're looking for in a solution?
So they have a particular header that says we're describing this solution. When you talk to the API, it says, here's who I am. I'm a trust registry. I'm a trust provider. Talks about some specifications for we're going to use HTTP and HTTPS for our API to communicate. Let's see, what other things does it specify besides the data model? That's the bulk of it. Just a couple ancillary little details that help an API work better.
Okay, sounds good. So does TOIP have a clear path for achieving this goal right now, or are they in the planning stages? Where is the group at?
So they've released a version 1 spec for trust registries. So they've done some work in this regard already, but that spec has been described as conceptual or exploratory. So I think that they wanted to get a batch of ideas together and then publish them and have some people look at them and provide some feedback, and maybe try a proof of concept and see how things would go. And now they're trying to incorporate what they've learned and create a version 2 spec. And so because it's a new year and they're getting ready for a new version of the spec, it is pretty pretty heavily in the planning stages at the moment, but I think that they're going to be able to identify their action items and get moving quickly.
Okay. Yeah, what were some of the action items from the meeting? What did you come away with?
So the first couple of action items are they want to propose a plan or a way forward that all of the participants in the task force could agree on. So let's identify where we're headed. They want to build the primary data models and describe a basic evolution for how they would take their version 1 spec and evolve it into a version 2 spec that meets their new needs. And then they're going to describe some ways to describe some ways to run the process. How are they going to collaborate as a diverse group of individuals and organizations? Are they going to have Zoom meetings? Are they going to work in GitHub? Is it going to be a Word doc? How are they going to publish? Just the meeting cadence, the kind of things that would say, let's make this group run smoothly. So those are a couple initial steps that they wanted to achieve.
What are your thoughts on these initial steps? Do you think that this is kind of heading in the right directions? And if you could, are there any alternatives to trust registries out there? What if you don't want to use one? What other technologies are there?
So I think that Trust over IP is headed in the right direction here, especially since they're working on coordinating their efforts with the diff and also paying attention to any other efforts in this area that crop up. So being aware of everything is a good idea. I think the approach of let's come up with something, try it a little bit, and then refine as we go, I think that's a useful approach. It's one that the diff and Indicio have used as well. So I've been attending both groups' meetings, both Trust over IP and Decentralized Identity Foundation. And when they come up with the time for the joint meetings between the two organizations, I'll be there as well. And so, the idea here that's come up in all of these meetings is that everybody wants the core data model to be unified, and that would allow these different solutions to be compatible, at least at some fundamental level. And then after they're compatible at that root level, some of them, people disagree on or have special needs for how those should be delivered to the people who are in the ecosystem and who need to use it. So some people say we really need to support an API. That's the model that we need. And others are saying, the file-based mechanism of delivering trust information is better for us. And so, so those are, the delivery method is different, but the core model overlaps really well. And so I think that the outcome and the direction is good. And there are some alternatives. There's the API route from Trust over IP. There's the file-based route from the diff. I think that the folks that are really into the JSON LD credential standard may publish their trust information as a credential. So there are a couple different ways to do it, and there are choices to be made. And so that's actually something that people will need to explore is, other than the core data model, what delivery mechanism or sharing mechanisms make sense for me.
So how do those differences look in practice? Do you think an end user would be able to identify, what solution you're using? Would it matter? And are there any key benefits where if you're using this technology, you should use, the file-based or something like that?
That's a good question. I think that for the end user, they're not going to really be able to tell most of the time what underlying technology is powering the trust solution. For the end user, most of the differences are going to be in a particular user interface model or implementation or metaphor. And some people might choose different ones there. But as far as the underlying data models and communication of trust information, they're probably not going to be able to see. So it becomes mostly a technology and implementation question, and that gets to be interesting. So, for example, trust registries, at least initially, are very API focused, where you have to call the API when you have a question about trust, and you would call, for information one item at a time usually, but they're also going to be, allow for a cached copy, a file of the data in their trust registry when necessary. And so I think that the strength of that solution is that it will be very up to date, because you have to ask the API most of the time. And so, you ask a question now and you get an answer based on data that was delivered from the API right now. And the other thing that's powerful about it is that you can have a limited query. An analogy is, if you need to know the definition of the word, you can immediately look up the definition of the word instead of having to read the entire dictionary to find it.
Right.
On the other hand, with the file-based approach, like from the Decentralized Identity Foundation, you don't have the heavier requirements of running an API. Being able to publish or retrieve or load a single file is typically a lighter weight and easier way to do things than an API. And it also means that you're implicitly cached. How often you retrieve that file can be, configured, and so you might retrieve it once a month or once a day or once an hour, but you've got caching built in. And so besides the easier implementation, the other benefit is that if you have an offline use case, you end up without an internet connection, you can still look up the words you need because you have the dictionary in your pocket. So even though you may have to look through all of the words in your dictionary, it's there with you and you can look it up. And that's, kind of the core assumption of that approach. So I think that, those are two different ways to approach it. One approach may eventually win out over the other, but I think there are use cases for both, and that it's more likely they'll coexist. The more interesting question will be to see which one ends up as the majority and how quickly the different implementations will roll out.
All right. Well, that sounds very cool. Thank you for, giving me those awesome different looks and definitions of those different technologies. It looks like we are about out of time. So thank you everyone for watching. If you like the content, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, and we'll continue to bring you some more news and interesting information from around the decentralized identity community. Thank you again to you, Mike. Do you know if this group is looking for more members? If someone wanted to get involved, is that a possibility? Where would you suggest they look?
So both Trust over IP and the DIF are looking for new members that would be happy to participate here. The danger is that you have too small of a group to provide information on what will become a critical spec. So they are both looking for new members. And then they would both also welcome everyone at the joint effort, which, the information about when and where to find that is TBD. But you can look at the Trust over IP or the Decentralized Identity Foundation websites. I've shared some links with Tim about where to find those specific task force or working groups. And, so I think, we'll have Tim post them with the YouTube video. You can find them on the websites just by searching. And of course, Indicio would be happy to help you find where to get started or answer questions.